The afternoon sun was warm, the kind of light that makes everything glow just before evening settles in. The streets were calm, filled with the everyday sounds of kids laughing, cars passing, and leaves rustling in the breeze. A teenager walked down the sidewalk, his basketball shoes tapping lightly against the pavement. He had just finished practice at school and his shoulders were heavy with his backpack, but his steps were easy and light. He was thinking about dinner, about his homework, about the game coming up next weekend. He had no idea that in just a few minutes, his peaceful walk home would turn into something he'd never forget. He was a good student, polite, quiet, and the kind of kid teachers liked having in class. He wasn't the type to get in trouble. His mother worked long hours in law enforcement, though most people didn't know what exactly she did. She was strict about his safety, always reminding him to text her when he left school and again when he reached home. It was their daily routine, one he sometimes thought was too much, but he never argued about it. He respected her worries because he knew she had seen things most people hadn't. That day he forgot to send the usual text. His phone battery had died during practice and he figured it wouldn't matter much. He was only a 10-minute walk away. The sky was still bright and the neighborhood was quiet. What could go wrong? As he crossed an intersection, a police cruiser turned the corner. He barely noticed it at first. He was used to seeing officers around. They slowed down, then stopped beside him. The passenger window rolled down. "Hey, you there, stop for a second," one officer said. He paused, confused, pulling one headphone out. "Yes, sir?" The tone of the officer wasn't friendly. The boy could sense that right away. "Where are you coming from?" the man asked. "School," he said simply, pointing to the logo on his hoodie. It had his high school name and team emblem printed across the front. The officer glanced at his partner, then back at the boy. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir. Just a few blocks away." But instead of letting him go, they both stepped out of the car. The second officer, taller and older, looked him over carefully, his eyes scanning his clothes, his bag, his shoes. "You match the description of someone we're looking for," he said. The words made the boy's stomach twist. "I what?" "I just came from basketball practice. Backpack, dark hoodie, black shorts. That's the description," the officer said flatly. "I have my student ID," the boy said, quickly reaching for his backpack zipper. "Hands where I can see them," one of the officers ordered sharply. He froze. His heart began to beat faster. His mouth went dry. "I'm just getting my ID," he said carefully, his voice shaking a little. "Didn't say move," the officer warned again. A few people across the street noticed what was happening. Two teenagers stopped riding their bikes. A woman paused while walking her dog, frowning at the scene. The boy could feel all their eyes on him, but he couldn't think of anything except doing exactly what the officers said. One of them moved closer. "Empty your pockets," he said. The boy hesitated. "Sir, I don't have anything, just my phone, but it's dead." The officer's expression stayed hard. "Do it slowly," he obeyed. He pulled out his phone, then his student card, his keys, and a few crumpled bills. His hands trembled slightly, not because he was guilty, but because he didn't understand why this was happening. "I'm telling you, I just came from practice," he said again, his voice cracking. The younger officer looked uncertain for a moment, glancing at the student card. "You said you live close?" "Yes, 2 blocks down, sir." The older officer wasn't convinced. "We got a report about someone breaking into a car around here." "You match the look." "Stay right there." He stepped aside to talk into his radio. The boy swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in his throat. He wanted to explain more, to say something that would make them understand, but the words just wouldn't come out right. Every movement felt dangerous. He remembered what his mom had told him so many times. If you're ever stopped, stay calm. Don't argue. Don't reach for anything unless they tell you to. Be polite no matter what. He was trying. He really was. But fear had a way of making even simple things hard. The air felt heavy. The people watching seemed nervous too, whispering to one another. One of them took out a phone and started recording. The officer on the radio came back, shaking his head. "No report on him yet," he said quietly. But his tone didn't change much. "Still doesn't mean he's clear." The boy wanted to disappear. He couldn't understand how something so ordinary could suddenly feel so wrong. Back at her office, his mother was finishing up paperwork. Her desk was neat as always, her badge glinting under the light. She had just gotten off a call when she thought about her son. Normally he'd have texted her by now. She checked her phone, nothing. She frowned and opened the app that let her track his phone. He always teased her for being overprotective, but she didn't mind. It was better to be safe. The app showed him stopped at a location a few blocks from home, not moving. Maybe he was talking to someone, she thought, but minutes passed and the dot didn't move. Her instincts, sharpened from years of work, began to whisper that something wasn't right. She tried calling him. No answer. Tried again. Still nothing. Her pulse quickened. She grabbed her keys, badge, and jacket, then headed out fast. Back on the street, the boy was still standing there, hands out slightly, trying to keep his breathing steady. The officers were now questioning him about where he lived, who he lived with, what he had been doing earlier that day. "I told you," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I was at basketball practice. You can even call my school." One of them sighed, clearly annoyed. "We'll decide what to do. Don't move." He nodded quickly, swallowing hard. He looked around again. The small crowd had grown. Someone whispered, "He's just a kid." Another said softly, "This doesn't look right." A car slowed as it passed by, and someone inside yelled, "Leave the boy alone." But the officers didn't respond. The boy felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, confusion, and embarrassment. He didn't know how to make it stop. He wasn't even sure what he had done to deserve this. He wished his mother were there. She always knew what to say. She always knew how to calm people down. Minutes later, a familiar black SUV turned the corner, moving fast but controlled. It stopped right behind the police car. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out, his mother. She didn't run toward them or shout. She walked with purpose, every step firm, her eyes locked on her son. The officers noticed her approaching but didn't know who she was yet. The boy felt a wave of relief wash over him, though he stayed still. His mother had arrived. She was calm, but inside her heart was pounding. She could see the fear on her son's face from yards away. She took a deep breath and reached into her jacket pocket where her badge rested. She wasn't ready to use it yet. She wanted to see what exactly was happening first. "Officers," she said clearly, her voice steady. "What seems to be the problem here?" The officers turned toward her. One of them, still holding his radio, looked slightly uneasy. "Ma'am, please stay back. We're handling something here." She didn't move back. She looked at her son, then back at them. "That something happens to be my child." The officers froze for a moment, glancing at each other. They hadn't expected that. Her tone wasn't angry, but it carried authority. Years in the field had taught her how to stay composed even when her emotions were burning inside. "I'm going to ask again," she said, her voice lower but firmer now. "What's the problem here?" The boy felt tears sting his eyes, not from fear this time, but from relief. His mother was here, and everything about her presence made the air feel different. The tension didn't disappear completely, but it shifted. The balance of power was no longer one-sided. She stepped closer, her hand still near her pocket where her credentials were. The crowd fell silent, waiting to see what would happen next. The officers looked unsure now, their confidence wavering. One of them started to explain something about a report, a matching description, but the mother's eyes said enough. She wasn't just any parent. Something about her calm strength made that clear. The boy stood perfectly still, heart pounding. As the moment hung in the air, 1 second stretching into another, that was the moment everything began to change. The air around them was still heavy, the kind of silence that feels thick and tense. The boy's mother stood beside him now, calm but alert, her eyes fixed on the officers who had stopped her son. The officers exchanged a quick glance, clearly realizing this situation was more complicated than they had thought. She spoke again, her tone low but steady. "He's my son." "You said there's a problem?" The older officer cleared his throat. "We received a call about a break-in down the street. The suspect's description matched." She cut him off gently. "Matched how?" He hesitated. "Teenage male, dark hoodie, carrying a bag." Her eyes flicked toward her son. "You just described half the kids walking home from school right now." The second officer looked down, unsure what to say. The crowd watching had grown larger now, but no one spoke. The mother took a step forward, pulling her badge from her pocket and holding it out. The silver glint of the FBI emblem caught the sunlight. Both officers froze. One of them blinked twice, realizing who they were talking to. The crowd began murmuring. The tension broke for just a second, but the damage was already done. She looked straight into their eyes. "You stopped my son because of his clothes and the color of his skin. You didn't even bother checking his ID before surrounding him. Ma'am, we were just following procedure, one of them said quietly. What procedure? She asked firmly. Because from what I can see, this looks like fear, not procedure. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. The people watching could feel it too. The kind of tone that comes from years of standing up for what's right. Her son stood quietly beside her, still trembling a little. He didn't want to cry, but his eyes stung. He'd always known his mother was strong, but seeing her like this made him feel both safe and proud. The older officer stepped back slightly, looking uncomfortable. We didn't know who he was. We were just trying to do our job. She looked at him for a long moment. Doing your job means protecting people, not frightening children. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of cars passing by in the distance. The mother turned to her son and asked softly, "You okay?" He nodded slowly, though his voice was small. "Yeah, I think so." She put a hand on his shoulder, steady and reassuring. That small gesture was enough to remind him he wasn't alone anymore. The officers tried to recover their composure. We'll let him go," one of them said, as if they were doing her a favor. She stared at them. "You never had a reason to hold him in the first place." They shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. The crowd began to whisper louder now, phones still recording, every second being captured. The mother's instincts as an agent were strong, but right now she wasn't thinking like a law enforcer. She was thinking like a mother. A mother who almost lost her son to a misunderstanding that never should have happened. Finally, she said, "We're done here." She took her son's backpack from the ground and guided him toward their car. The crowd parted quietly to let them pass. People looked at her with a mix of respect and sympathy. Once inside the car, the door shut, and for the first time since she arrived, she took a deep breath. Her hand, steady a moment ago, trembled slightly now. She reached over and touched her son's arm. "You sure you're all right?" He nodded again, though the truth was he didn't know. "I didn't do anything, Mom. I was just walking." "I know," she said softly. "You did everything right." For a moment, they sat there in silence. The flashing lights from the police car still reflected faintly in the rearview mirror. She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and frustration. "I shouldn't have to flash a badge for people to treat you like a human being." He looked out the window, watching as the officers got back into their car, their heads down. He didn't feel angry exactly, more confused. "Would they have listened to me if you didn't come?"
he asked quietly. She didn't answer right away.
Her silence said enough. The drive home was quiet at first. The sun was setting, turning the sky shades of orange and pink. The peaceful beauty outside didn't match what they both felt inside. When they pulled into the driveway, the boy leaned his head against the window. "I thought I did everything you taught me," he whispered. She turned off the engine and faced him. "You did," she said. "This wasn't your fault." He finally looked at her. "But they didn't listen," she sighed. "Sometimes people don't. But that doesn't mean you stop doing the right thing. It means we make sure things change." He nodded slowly, though the weight of the moment still sat on his shoulders. Inside the house, everything was quiet and familiar. The family photos on the wall, the smell of dinner that she had prepared earlier in the slow cooker, the sound of the clock ticking, ordinary things that now felt strangely comforting. She made him sit down and brought him a glass of water. "Drink this," she said gently. He took a sip, his hand still slightly shaking. "You think they're in trouble now?" She looked at him carefully. "I'm not thinking about them right now. I'm thinking about you." He managed a small smile, though his eyes still looked tired. "You really scared them, Mom." A faint smile crossed her face. "Good. Maybe they'll think twice next time before jumping to conclusions." He nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. "You always know what to say." "Not always," she said, brushing his hair back. "But I do know when someone messes with my kid." They both laughed quietly, a small release after the tension of the afternoon. It wasn't a full laugh, but it was enough to make the room feel lighter. Later that night, after he went to bed, she sat alone at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the house. She replayed everything in her head, the look on her son's face, the way the officers spoke, the fear that had filled the air. She opened her laptop and began typing up a report. Not as a mother, but as an agent. The facts, the time, the details, all written down carefully. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. Still, her heart ached. Because even with all her training, all her authority, she couldn't protect her son from the world's assumptions. She could only step in once it had already begun. Upstairs, the boy lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought about how quickly everything had changed. One minute he was thinking about dinner, the next he was standing in front of two officers who looked at him like he was someone else. He didn't hate them. He didn't even know what to feel. But he knew one thing. He would never forget that feeling. The way the world could shift in an instant. He thought about his mother, how calm she had been, how she had stood there like a wall between him and everything that scared him. He had never been more grateful. The next morning, she drove him to school. The world outside seemed normal again, cars honking, people rushing to work, kids laughing on the sidewalks. But something inside both of them had changed. She parked outside the school gate and looked at him. "You sure you're ready?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'll be okay." Before he got out, she said softly, "Remember, you don't have to be afraid of who you are, ever." He nodded again, her words echoing in his head as he stepped out of the car. As she watched him walk toward the entrance, her phone buzzed with a call from her office. Her supervisor's voice came through. "Heard something happened last night." "You okay?" "I'm fine," she said, eyes still on her son. "But I think we need to talk about how we train local officers." "Understood," the voice said on the other end. She hung up, leaning back in her seat, taking one deep breath. She didn't know what would come next. Complaints, investigations, or headlines. But she did know one thing. She wasn't going to let the moment fade, because sometimes change doesn't start with a speech or a protest. Sometimes it starts with one moment, a mother standing up for her child and refusing to stay silent. And for her, that was enough to begin. The next few days passed slowly, though life seemed to move on for everyone else. The boy tried to return to his normal routine, school, basketball practice, hanging out with friends. But something inside him had changed. The walk to school that once felt ordinary now felt heavier. Every time he saw a police car pass by, his chest tightened without meaning to. He didn't talk about it much, not even to his friends. They had seen the video online, the one someone from the crowd had posted. It had spread quickly, getting hundreds of thousands of views overnight. People were talking about it everywhere. Some praised the mother for how she handled it. Others argued about what really happened. For him, it was strange hearing his own story told by strangers who didn't even know his name. At school, teachers treated him a little differently. They asked gentle questions like, "You doing okay?" Or, "You want to talk to someone?" He appreciated it but didn't know what to say. He didn't feel angry, just tired. One afternoon after practice, he sat alone on the bleachers. The gym lights buzzed softly above him. His coach walked over, holding a clipboard and a bottle of water. "You've been quiet lately," the coach said. "Everything all right?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." The coach sat down beside him. "That video, saw it. Everyone has. I just want you to know, you handled yourself well. A lot of people are proud of how calm you stayed." He looked down at his shoes. "I wasn't calm inside," he said softly. "I know," the coach replied. "But sometimes courage doesn't look like fighting back. Sometimes it looks like keeping your cool when you want to run." The boy nodded slowly, appreciating the words more than he showed. Meanwhile, his mother was dealing with her own storm. At the office, word of what happened had reached the higher-ups. She had filed an official complaint against the local police department, attaching her full report and the video evidence that had gone viral. Some of her colleagues supported her. Others told her quietly that this would make waves. She didn't care about waves. She cared about change. One evening, she sat at the dining table surrounded by papers, her laptop open. Her son came downstairs, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "You're still working on that report?" he asked. She looked up and smiled faintly. "Trying to make sure it's done right." He sat across from her, watching as she typed. "Do you think anything will happen because of it?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I can't pretend it didn't happen. If I let it go, it could happen to someone else." He nodded slowly. "You really think people can change?" She leaned back, thinking about that. "I think people can learn, but they don't learn unless someone makes them face the truth." He didn't reply, but her words stayed in his head long after. A few days later, she received a call from her supervisor. There's going to be a meeting, he said. Local officials want to discuss the incident, public image, accountability, all that. They're inviting you to attend. She wasn't sure she wanted to go. She wasn't interested in politics or saving face. But then she thought about her son and said, I'll be there. The meeting was held at the city hall. When she arrived, the room was filled with people, city leaders, law enforcement heads, reporters, and a few community representatives. Cameras flashed as she walked in. The air felt stiff with formality. The police chief stood at the front, speaking in careful tones about miscommunication and protocol review. She listened quietly, arms crossed, not out of defiance but out of discipline. When it was her turn to speak, she stood up, calm as always. My son was walking home from school, she began. He was stopped, questioned, and treated like a criminal. He's 16. He's never broken a law in his life. That shouldn't have happened. The room was silent. I've been in law enforcement for over a decade, she continued. I know what real police work looks like. I also know what fear looks like. And what I saw that day wasn't procedure, it was fear disguised as authority. Reporters scribbled notes. The police chief shifted in his seat. I'm not here to shame anyone, she said. I'm here to remind you that every time an officer acts on fear instead of fact, a family pays the price. Sometimes that price is humiliation. Sometimes it's worse. I was lucky enough to arrive in time. Not every parent gets that chance. The weight of her words filled the room. For a few seconds, no one spoke. After the meeting, reporters crowded around her asking questions. She answered politely but briefly. This isn't about me, she said. It's about what's right. Her son watched the coverage that night on TV. Seeing his mother on screen, strong, composed, unshaken, filled him with pride. But it also reminded him that what happened wasn't over. It was part of something bigger. That weekend, they went to visit his grandmother's house on the other side of town. The neighborhood was quieter there, filled with tall trees and small gardens. His grandmother hugged him tightly the moment she saw him. My brave boy, she said softly. You scared me when I saw that video. I'm okay, Grandma, he said, trying to sound convincing. She smiled, brushing a hand over his hair. You got your mother's spirit, you know that? He laughed a little. I guess so. Over dinner, the family talked about other things, school, neighbors, plans for the holidays, but underneath the laughter, everyone knew what still lingered in their minds. Later that night, he sat on the porch while his mother joined him with 2 cups of hot chocolate. The air was cool and the crickets chirped in the distance. Mom, he said quietly, do you think they'll ever see me differently? She looked at him for a moment, then handed him the cup. Some might not, but that doesn't define you. You define you. He sipped slowly, thinking about that. I don't want people to feel sorry for me. They don't, she said softly. They see strength. You stayed calm, you didn't lose control. That matters. He nodded, though deep down he still wrestled with the memory. The following week, his school organized a discussion about fairness and safety. His teacher asked if he wanted to share his experience. At first he said no, but later, after thinking it through, he agreed. When the day came, he stood at the front of the classroom, heart pounding, hands trembling slightly. Everyone watched quietly. I didn't think it would happen to me, he began. I wasn't doing anything wrong. But sometimes that doesn't matter. Sometimes people see what they want to see. He paused, his throat tightening a little. I was scared. But I remembered what my mom always told me. Stay calm. That probably saved me. A few students nodded slowly, listening. I don't want anyone to hate the police, he continued. I just want people to think before they judge. That's all. When he finished, the room was quiet for a few seconds before the teacher started clapping. Soon, everyone joined in. That moment didn't erase what had happened, but it gave him something he hadn't felt since that day. Control. That night, when he came home, his mother was waiting in the living room. Your teacher called, she said, smiling. She told me what you did today, he shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. It was, she said softly. You spoke from the heart. That's the kind of courage that changes things. He smiled shyly. I just said what I felt. That's all it takes, she said. She turned off the lamp and stood by the window looking outside. The street was quiet, the same one where it had all happened. But now it looked different, like the world had shifted slightly toward something better. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from a local journalist who wanted to do a short feature about families who had experienced similar situations. She hesitated before replying, then finally typed, "Yes, I'll talk." Not for attention, not for fame, but because she knew silence never solved anything. And somewhere deep inside, she felt hope. Hope that one day her son's story would be more than a warning. It would be a lesson. A reminder that understanding can grow from pain if people are willing to listen. For now, though, she turned off the lights, checked once more that her son was asleep, and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. They had survived the moment that could have gone so differently, and that was enough to keep her fighting for what was right. The air was heavy with tension as the boy stood frozen beside the police car. He could hear the steady hum of the engines, the faint buzz of people talking around him, and the pounding of his own heartbeat. His mind felt blank and loud at the same time. Every second dragged, and he didn't know what to do except keep his hands where they could see them. The world had shrunk to that one street corner, flashing lights, curious eyes, and two officers standing too close. Then a car pulled up fast from the opposite end of the street. It stopped hard enough that everyone turned. The boy blinked as the door opened and a woman stepped out, moving quickly but with control. Her face showed calm strength, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be noticed. The officers took a step back, uncertain as she approached. "Step away from him," she said in a voice that carried across the quiet crowd. She held up her badge, the silver letters catching the afternoon light. The words Federal Bureau of Investigation shone clear enough for everyone to see. The officers froze. For a moment, no one said a word. The woman's eyes locked onto her son, then shifted sharply to the officers. Her voice stayed calm, but each word carried weight. "You need to tell me exactly why you have my son detained." The taller officer tried to gather himself. "Ma'am, we had a report," she cut in softly. "A report of what?" "Because I can already tell you my son just left basketball practice. His school is 2 blocks away. You have his bag, his student ID, and probably 10 witnesses watching. So I'll ask again, what's your probable cause?" The officer hesitated. The crowd grew. Phones were lifted higher, recording every second. The other officer, younger and clearly nervous, stepped back slightly, glancing toward his partner as if silently asking what to do next. The woman's tone stayed even, but firm. "If you thought he matched a description, did you confirm it? Did you call it in? Did you check his ID before putting your hands on him?" No answer came. The taller officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the cameras now aimed directly at him. The boy's mother stood between them and her son now, her posture protective yet professional. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't aggressive. She was controlled, confident, and precise. The crowd felt the shift in power. The same officers who had been commanding seconds ago now looked uncertain. One of them tried again, his voice quieter this time. "Ma'am, it was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" she repeated, almost whispering. "A misunderstanding that could have ended my son's life." The boy looked at his mother, his eyes wide but filled with relief. He had never seen her like this, calm and fierce at the same time. She glanced back at him just for a moment, her expression softening before she turned to the officers again. "I'm going to need both of your badge numbers," she said. "Now." The taller one hesitated, but she didn't move until they gave them. Then she pulled out her phone, called someone, and began speaking in the same steady tone. "Yes, this is Agent Parker. I'm reporting an incident involving officers from the local precinct. Yes, right now, corner of Maple and 7th. I need an internal supervisor on site immediately." Her words carried a quiet authority that left no room for argument. The officers looked smaller somehow, unsure of where to stand or what to say. The crowd murmured, some whispering in disbelief, others clapping softly. The boy finally spoke, his voice small but steady. "Mom, can we go home?" She turned to him, gently placed a hand on his shoulder, and nodded. "Soon," she said. "But we're not leaving until this is documented properly." The supervisor arrived within minutes, an older man who clearly recognized her. The moment he saw her badge, his expression changed from irritation to worry. "Agent Parker." "I wasn't aware." "I'm sure you weren't," she replied evenly. "But your officers need retraining on how to identify minors, especially before detaining them based solely on skin color and vague descriptions." The supervisor sighed, glancing at the two officers who now looked like they wanted to disappear. "We'll handle this internally," he said quietly. "No," she corrected. "You'll handle it transparently. There's a difference." Her voice wasn't angry. It was calm and deliberate, like every word had been chosen ahead of time. She wasn't there to humiliate anyone. She was there to make sure this never happened again. The crowd slowly began to disperse, though several stayed back to shake her hand or quietly thank her for standing up. Some of them had filmed the whole thing. One woman whispered, "You saved him," before walking away. The boy finally let out the breath he'd been holding since it all started. His mother turned to him and pulled him into a hug, tight and long. The noise of the city faded around them. Sirens, cars, voices. Everything blurred for a moment except the warmth of her arms and the feeling of safety returning. She whispered softly, "You're okay now." "I'm here." He nodded against her shoulder. It didn't feel real yet, but the fear that had been clawing at his chest finally began to ease. When they finally got back into her car, the boy stared out the window, silent. His mother didn't speak for a few minutes either. She just drove, both hands on the wheel, eyes focused ahead. After a while, she said quietly, "I know that was scary. I know it was unfair. But I want you to remember something important." He turned to her, waiting. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "You were calm, respectful, and patient, even when they weren't. That matters. You handled yourself exactly how I taught you, and I'm proud of you for that." The boy's eyes welled up, but he blinked hard, trying not to cry. I thought they weren't going to listen," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, her voice gentle. "And sometimes they don't. But you always remember who you are. You don't let fear make you forget your worth." They drove in silence again for a while. The setting sun painted the sky in soft orange and gold. It looked peaceful, almost too peaceful for what had just happened. When they reached home, she parked the car and turned to face him fully. "This isn't over," she said. "I'm going to make sure this goes through the right channels. What happened today can't just disappear." He nodded slowly. "Will they get in trouble?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But what matters is that it's not ignored. That's how things start to change. One truth at a time." He looked down at his hands, still shaking a little, then whispered, "Thank you for coming." She smiled softly. "There's nowhere else I'd ever be." Inside the house, the quiet felt different, heavier somehow. But it was also safe. The boy sat on the couch, replaying everything in his mind. The flashing lights, the crowd, the fear. And then the look on his mother's face when she arrived. That memory, strong and unshakable, became the one he held on to. His mother stepped into the kitchen, making tea like she always did when something heavy had happened. The simple sound of boiling water filled the silence. She brought him a cup, sat beside him, and for the first time since the incident began, they both allowed themselves to breathe normally. Neither spoke much that evening. They didn't need to. The silence wasn't empty. It was healing. The kind of silence that comes after surviving something that could have gone another way. Later that night, when he went to bed, he glanced at his phone. There were already clips circulating online. Short videos of his mother stepping out of the car, confronting the officers, standing tall and calm. People were sharing it with words like strength, courage, and justice. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time that day, he felt hope. Not just for himself, but for every other person who might one day find themselves in his place. Because now people were watching, and maybe, just maybe, that would make a difference. The days after the incident felt heavy, like time had slowed down. The boy tried to go back to his normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every time he walked down the same street where it had happened, he could still hear the sound of the police radios, the voices shouting, and his own heart racing. Even when things were quiet, his mind wasn't. At school, people looked at him differently. Some classmates who had seen the video came up to say they were sorry, or that they had shared it online. Others just stared, unsure what to say. A few teachers asked if he was okay, but he didn't have the words to explain what it felt like, to be seen that way. Not as himself, but as someone to be feared. He smiled and said he was fine, but deep down he wasn't sure he believed it. His mother noticed the change too. She didn't push him to talk, but she checked in often. A soft knock on his door, a gentle, "How are you doing today?" He always said he was fine, though both of them knew it wasn't that simple. She had been in law enforcement long enough to know that fear doesn't just disappear. It lingers, waiting for quiet moments to return. At work, she filed the official complaint. She provided evidence, the body cam request, and the videos from bystanders. She wrote a detailed report, not out of anger but out of duty. She knew that her son's experience wasn't an isolated one, and that her position gave her the responsibility to make sure it meant something. News stations began reaching out. The story had spread farther than either of them expected. The image of the calm mother stepping out of her car, badge in hand, confronting officers who had mistaken her teenage son for a suspect, had captured people's attention. To many, it was a moment of justice, a rare example of calm power meeting unfair authority and standing firm. When the first reporter called, the mother hesitated. She didn't want to expose her son to more public attention, but she also knew staying silent might let the story fade too quickly. After thinking it over, she agreed to speak, not about anger or blame, but about awareness. The interview took place in their living room. The boy sat beside his mother, nervous at first, his hands folded tightly in his lap. The interviewer asked gentle questions. What had happened that day, what it felt like, what they hoped would come from sharing their story. The mother's voice stayed steady. "I don't want this to turn into another argument," she said. "I want people to learn from it. My son could have been anyone's child. I just happened to arrive in time. But not every parent gets that chance." The boy glanced at her, feeling both proud and sad at the same time. He spoke quietly, his voice careful but clear. "I just want to be seen for who I am. That's all." The video spread quickly. People across the country shared it, calling it a reminder of both the problem and the possibility for change. Messages poured in, some from strangers offering support, some from other parents who said they understood the fear. There were letters from students, teachers, even police officers who said they were moved by how calm and respectful the confrontation had been. For the first time in days, the boy felt something lift from his chest. It didn't erase what happened, but it replaced part of the fear with purpose. He realized that by speaking up, they might help someone else avoid going through the same thing. At home, life slowly found rhythm again. His mother returned to her usual work hours, and he focused on finishing the school year strong. But things were different between them now, closer somehow. They talked more openly, even about uncomfortable things. One night, sitting at the kitchen table, he asked quietly, "Mom, were you scared that day?" She looked up from her tea, thinking for a moment. "Of course I was," she said. "But I couldn't show it. I've learned that sometimes you have to be calm even when you're not. Fear doesn't make you weak. It just means you care about what could be lost." He nodded slowly. That answer stayed with him. It made him understand her strength in a new way. Weeks later, they received a letter from the police department. The internal review had been completed. The officers involved were undergoing additional training, and the department had issued an apology. It wasn't perfect, but it was something, an acknowledgement that the system had failed that day. When the mother read the letter aloud, the boy just listened quietly. "Do you think they mean it?" he asked. "I think it's a start," she said softly. "Real change takes time, but this is how it begins." She placed the letter in a folder with the case notes and closed it carefully. "We move forward," she added. The boy started volunteering at a youth center later that summer. It wasn't something anyone asked him to do. He just wanted to. He began helping younger kids with homework, teaching them basketball drills, and talking about staying calm and confident in difficult situations. He never mentioned his own experience directly, but his words carried the quiet weight of someone who understood what fear felt like. The kids liked him. They trusted him. And every time he saw one of them smile or learn something new, he felt lighter. Helping them gave him back a sense of control, the idea that he could turn something painful into something good. His mother watched all this with quiet pride. She didn't tell him, but seeing him smile again was her greatest relief. The strength, she'd shown that day had come from love, but the recovery afterward came from his resilience. He was healing in his own way. Months passed, and the story eventually faded from the headlines, replaced by newer ones. But for the two of them, it was never really gone. It lived in the lessons they had learned about awareness, courage, and the quiet power of staying calm under pressure. Sometimes people at the grocery store or the gym still recognized her. They'd approach shyly, saying things like, "Thank you for what you did," or "You made me think differently." She always smiled politely, grateful but humble,